Hey Windowers, and welcome to another episode of Windows on Windows, part of the series on the development of Windows 98. In this episode we'll be taking a look at Windows Codename Memphis build 1351, an alpha build compiled on the 12th of December 1996 of what was to become Windows 98. This build contains a few changes from Windows 95, but nothing extraordinary. However, we will take a look at what has changed in this video. With all that said, let's start. So here we are at the desktop of what it apparently is Microsoft Memphis version 4.10.1351. Now this is Windows Codename Memphis, is what it would usually be known as these days, and it's a very early version of what was to become Windows 98. So visually, really not very different from Windows 95. And before we look into the actual desktop UI here, I just want to talk a little bit about the setup procedure that I showed you earlier in the video. So you may have noticed in setup there were a few changes that made it different to Windows 95's setup. So one of the most obvious ones is the background image. So rather than like in Windows 95 the dark blue background image, there's now more of a teal colour. However, like 95's setup procedure, there were various graphics of various computer equipment, computer programs in the background. So 95 had like a mouse and a keyboard. You can see in the Windows 98 setup there were various different applications being shown, so that's all good. Another big change in setup, and this is a change that stayed in Windows Millennium Edition, is the introduction of a sidebar on the left hand side, which takes you through the various steps in the setup procedure, which wasn't present in 95's setup. And one more thing, you will have hopefully noticed that the boot screen was different to Windows 95, so this build of Memphis has its own boot screen, and it calls itself a developer release, and indeed it was, funnily enough. Okay, so coming back to the desktop, and one of the first things I noticed in this build is that there's no startup sound. Now I think, based on looking in the sound properties, that this is actually a bug. So if you go into the sound settings here, and then if you scroll down to, what's it called, Start Windows, it says that it can't find this file, mssound.wave. However, if you then manually browse for a file and ignore this message, this comes up all the time. It comes up when you first boot up. I've tried doing what it says, but it doesn't work. So I'm just going to keep clicking OK if that comes up. So as I was saying, if you go to the media folder on here, there is actually the Microsoft sound still present, and this is the 95 startup sound. So if you set this, you get the good old 95 startup sound again. So yeah, I think that is actually a bug. Now, since we're in Control Panel, let's go to Display and ignore that same error message again. And here we are in Display Properties. Now, those of you that follow the series will know that I spend a lot of my time in Display Properties, and that's because I'm a sucker for UI and Windows themes specifically. So I do love looking at all the wallpapers and stuff. Now on here, I'm pretty sure that all of these things are from 95 and there's nothing new. I don't know why I did that, that was a different option. So you've got all your patterns here, and then the same wallpapers, so black thatch. Oh, that's a classic, that one. What else? Bubbles. Oh, do you remember these ones? This is awesome. Takes me back to my childhood. Clouds. I mean, there's just no better wallpaper. And that needs to be on my gravestone, please, in quotes. You cannot beat Windows 9X clouds for a wallpaper. Although I was quite impartial to this one as well, when I had 98. Red block, it's lovely. However, I'm just going to go back to none, I think. I'm just going to be a bit boring. Right, there we go. Okay, so then screensavers. Again, I think from memory these are all of the 95 screensavers. Nothing new, nothing removed. Same in appearance, we've got all the 95 themes, again nothing new, nothing removed. However, there is a little oddity here, which is actually quite interesting, and I don't know how long this stayed in 98's development, but if you look in here, there is an option that I don't recognise, and it's called mouse highlight, and I have never seen this before. What it does is, if you take your mouse cursor and you put it over a button such as this one here with the arrows on, you see it actually highlights the arrow to sort of indicate that you can click it and it does something, and it highlights it in this mouse highlight colour. So if we change it to, for example, red and apply, if I now go back to these arrows, they highlight in red. And as I say, this was amazing to me. I've never seen this in Windows before. It does it on all of the scroll bar elements. Now, I've not seen it on actual buttons or little checkboxes, but I wonder where else it'll appear. And actually, now that I've said that, it's on these window buttons here. So there you go. That's mouse highlight in Windows Codename Memphis. Who knew? Who knew? You may have, but I didn't. I had no idea. So that made my day. Made my day. In fact, I'm going to make that orange. Why not? Let's make this orange. Why not? Please forgive me while I do this. I just can't get enough of all these themes. There we go. Okay, and apply. Lovely. Look at that. Brilliant. Just in time for summer. Now, another changed feature in this build of Memphis is a new tab in display properties. We have a tab called Plus. Now, if you're familiar with Windows 9X, you might know that Plus was it was like a software pack. So you could install it, or it did come pre-installed with some computers, I guess. And it just gave you a selection of desktop themes that you could add to Windows 98 and that sort of thing. So they had like mystery theme, nature theme, and all sorts. It was brilliant. On here, the themes are not present, but you do have this tab. So on here, you've got, and all of these options made it into 98. You have the option to change desktop icons. Now, speaking of these icons, you may notice that specifically this computer icon, network neighborhood, and recycle bin icons are different to the 95 icons. These are actually high color icons that are enabled by default in this build if you have a high enough color depth, which is pretty good. Now, you also have these options here. So you've got use large icons. So let's see what that looks like. Awful. I think we can all agree. I don't know, it fixed itself. It's okay. But we don't really need that on this very low resolution virtual machine. But you have that option. You've got show window contents while dragging. So that's when you do this and you select, again, I'm sure you all know this, and you move them around and it shows you. Although actually it didn't do it with those icons, but if you did this with a window, there you go. It shows the actual window moving around. If you take this off, it'll just show an outline instead. There you go. You've got smooth edges of screen fonts, which really didn't make any difference. Show icons using all possible colors. So if I turn this off and apply, we'll get the old icons back, although I have to restart for that to happen. And then you have this option, which is in a very peculiar place, but it shows that they were at least thinking about this option being a necessity, because it really is. Stretch the desktop wallpaper to fit the screen, because you really do have to do that. Why would you want one of these centered? You just wouldn't. So there you go, let's put clouds on. Although it didn't stretch it, I don't really know why. Do you have to put it onto center maybe? There you go, so that's got to be set on center. And then you tick, ooh, wrong tab, and then you tick that, and then it stretches it. Brilliant. And then you've got your normal settings tab at the end there. So there we go. A few little things in display properties. I love that, look at that, I just love it. I know I'm going off topic again, but look, that's amazing. I love that. I don't know why they didn't keep that. Now that is actually, as far as I've been able to find out through my own research, the only things that have really changed in this build, or at least the only really significant things, and that's really because this build is very early on still in the development of Windows 98. However, I'll show you a few other things that you may be interested in. So for example, in Explorer windows, as you might have seen already, if you were paying attention earlier, they act like the Windows 95 Explorer, so there's no address bar, there's no web integration or any of that, that's all still to come. So this acts completely like 95, so you have everything opening in its own window, which is very annoying, very, very annoying. But that's just the way 95 worked. You've got to love it for what it was. You can change it in here, let's just do that, why not? So there you go, that's a lot better. Here's the Plus folder. Like I said, the themes are not included, but you have got this. I'm not really sure what that is. Oh, it's a startup disk wizard. Okay. So that's Explorer. The start menu, we have a look. Shows itself as Windows 95 here. I don't think anything's different to 95. I think it's all the same programs, etc. in here. If we click on the internet, which is a brilliant name for this. Oh dear, not this. Don't make me connect a modem, please. The internet takes us to Internet Explorer 3, which has an error message on startup. Why not? So here we go. Good old IE. Rest in peace. Let's look at these release notes. So we've got here Memphis release notes. So as I said, this was released to developers, this build. So it came with its own set of release notes, which you can see here. So December the 15th, 1996. And this guide contains installation instructions, technical application notes, and known issues for the new features included in this release. Blah, blah, blah. You can always pause and read this if you really want to. So I don't know, let's just go to welcome, why not? Welcome to the beta test program for Memphis, the next major release of Windows. This is the first beta release, called Memphis Developer Release December 1996. La-di-da-di-da. Oh, and 10 responsibilities of a beta tester. Please maintain confidentiality about this release and its features. Unless you're living about 20 years later and then you can just shove it on the internet. Install and use the software promptly, etc. I'll let you read this of your own accord, you don't want to listen to me read all this out. So as you can see, it's a very in-depth set of notes. Oh, what is Memphis? This has caught my attention. Over the past year, Windows 95 has had 2 supplemental releases. The primary goal of this is to enable developers working on Memphis. Well, that's what it said before. Oh, it's built on the same code base as Windows 95. Our goal is to provide the same level of compatibility as Windows 95 while improving hardware support, system stability, and robustness, reducing support and administration costs, and updating internet applications and other utilities. Brilliant. What's new in Memphis? I'm getting hooked to this now. Sorry guys, might have to cut this. Oh, now look at that. I should have read this when I was doing my research because it tells you what's changed. New setup. The first thing you will see is that setup has been redesigned and streamlined to improve the experience. Well, there you go. Oh dear. So yeah, as you can see, there's other stuff here that I've not mentioned. So ACPI power management, that was a big thing. The plus tab, there you go. Look, they've explained it all to you here. Brilliant. Okay, that's enough release notes. So I hope you've enjoyed this first look at one of the earliest builds of Codename Memphis, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more exciting stuff to see as these builds develop. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you then.